"She's too heavy to carry." The groom's friends mocked, but the mountain man lifted her like a feather. "She's too heavy to carry." The words echoed through St. Mary's Church like a whip crack. It was supposed to be Sarah Montgomery's happiest day. The summer sun streamed through the stained glass windows, scattering rainbows across her white dress. But behind her veil, tears shimmered instead of joy. 24, soft-hearted and fuller-figured than any bride in Riverside, Sarah stood trembling beside Thomas Whitmore, the man her family had chosen for her. The marriage was a bargain, his money for her father's debts. When the priest announced the traditional bridal lift, Thomas bent awkwardly, his face twisting with strain. He managed to raise her only an inch before gasping and dropping his hands. "Good Lord, Sarah," he wheezed, "you're too heavy." Laughter exploded through the pews. "Maybe the groom needs a gym," someone snickered. "She'll break his back before the honeymoon," another jeered. Sarah froze, her cheeks burning scarlet. Every cruel whisper pierced like a blade. The music stopped. The priest looked away. Even her father's eyes fell to the floor in shame. Thomas straightened, avoiding her gaze. "This is ridiculous," he muttered. "I can't do this." At that moment, the heavy doors of the church burst open. A gust of warm air swept through the aisle, along with a man whose presence silenced every cruel tongue. He was enormous, broad-shouldered, dressed in black that clung to muscle and dust. His hair, dark as iron, framed eyes that glowed like embered steel. "Apologies for the interruption," he said, his voice deep enough to shake the rafters. "But I believe you're making a mistake." Every head turned. Even Sarah forgot to breathe. The stranger stepped forward, gaze fixed only on her. "Because that woman," he said evenly, "was never meant to be mocked. She was meant to be cherished." The air in St. Mary's Church grew still as the stranger's words echoed off the stone walls. The laughter died in the throats of those who had mocked her. Sarah Montgomery, turned slowly, her heart hammering. The man who had spoken stood tall near the open doors, sunlight pouring around him. His name was Dominic Steele, though most folks in Riverside whispered another name, Dom the Mountain Man, or Steel Ridge's Ghost. He was a blacksmith and miner, a man who had wrestled storms and lived among mountains that broke lesser men. There was a rumor that he could lift a horse, and that he once carried a wounded friend 10 miles through a blizzard. His legend made children stare and grown men lower their voices. And now he was looking only at her. "Who are you?" Thomas Whitmore barked, his voice cracking. Dom's gaze flicked to him like the swing of an axe. "The man who loves her." The crowd gasped. Sarah blinked. You can't mean—" "Yes," he said quietly, "I can, and I do." Her breath caught in her chest. She knew him, at least from glimpses in the marketplace. He was the man who had always helped carry barrels for the elderly, who had fixed the church's gate for free, who always nodded politely when she passed, but never spoke more than a word. She thought him distant, cold even, but his eyes now, warm, burning, alive, spoke more than any man's ever had. Thomas stepped closer, his pride shaking. "This is my wedding, you brute. You can't just barge in here." Dom's voice dropped low, each word steady and sharp. "I can when a woman's being humiliated. You've done enough." The priest hesitated. "Mr. Steele, please, this isn't proper." But before he could finish, Dom walked straight to Sarah. Every step he took echoed like a heartbeat in the silent church. He stopped in front of her and bowed his head slightly. "You don't deserve this," he said softly. "Not their laughter, not his shame." Her lips trembled. "Then what do I deserve?" He smiled faintly. "To be seen as you are, and carried as far as I can go." Then, to the horror and awe of everyone watching, he slipped one arm beneath her back, the other beneath her knees, and lifted her effortlessly into his arms. Gasps filled the church. Sarah's veil fluttered as he stood tall, holding her as though she weighed nothing at all. "See," he said evenly, turning toward the stunned crowd. "She isn't heavy. She's mine to carry." Sarah's eyes widened. "Yours?" Dom looked down at her, his expression gentle but sure. "If you'll have me." Thomas sputtered, red-faced. "You can't just steal my bride," Dom's voice thundered. "You never deserved to call her that." The crowd fell utterly silent. Even the priest's hand trembled where he held his Bible. For the first time since the ceremony began, Sarah didn't feel small. She didn't feel ashamed. She felt safe. Her heart whispered the truth she had always been too afraid to speak. This was what love was supposed to feel like. As Dom turned toward the altar, still carrying her, his deep voice filled the church once more. "Father," he said quietly, "let's finish this wedding properly." And though her world had shattered only moments before, Sarah Montgomery suddenly believed that maybe, just maybe, it was about to be rebuilt stronger than steel. When Dom Steele carried Serafina Sarah Montgomery out of the church, the sunlight hit her face like the first breath after drowning. The townspeople poured outside behind them, stunned into silence. Not one dared to laugh now. Dom didn't rush. Each step was steady, deliberate, as if he were carrying something sacred. His arms didn't tremble, not even once. "Put me down, please," Sarah whispered, her voice trembling. "Everyone's watching." "They've watched you suffer long enough," Dom murmured. "Let them see what respect looks like." She turned her face away, tears slipping down her cheeks. For the first time in her life, she was being carried not out of pity, but out of pride. When they reached his black stallion, he set her gently on her feet. "You can ride with me," he said. "I've never ridden a horse before." "Then hold tight," he replied. He swung up first, then reached down and lifted her effortlessly into the saddle before him. She gasped, clutching at his arm. "You're safe," he said softly, guiding her hands around his waist. "I won't let you fall." And with that, he clicked his tongue, and the horse surged forward, hooves pounding over the dirt road. The church, the laughter, and Thomas Whitmore's pale, angry face vanished behind them. For the first hour, neither of them spoke. The rhythm of the horse and the hum of cicadas filled the silence between them. Sarah's mind was a storm of confusion and disbelief. "You shouldn't have done that," she said finally. "You humiliated him." Dom's deep chuckle rumbled in his chest. He humiliated himself. "He'll come after you," she said. "He can try," Dom replied simply. "But I didn't do this to fight him. I did it because no woman deserves to be laughed at in her own wedding dress." She was quiet for a while, thinking. Then softly, "You said you loved me." "I did," he said without hesitation, "but we barely know each other." He turned his head just enough for her to catch his faint smile. "Sometimes a man doesn't need years to know. Sometimes he just sees, and it's enough." Sarah swallowed hard. "When did you see me?" "The first time you came to my forge," he said. "You brought your father's broken wagon wheel. Everyone else in town avoided me like I was a monster, but you smiled, and you said thank you." She remembered. She had only been 16, nervous and shy. "That was years ago." "I know," he said quietly, "and I haven't stopped thinking about you since." The words hit her like sunlight through storm clouds, warm, unbelievable, beautiful. They rode on until the road began to climb. The air grew cooler, the trees thicker. When the trail narrowed, Dom dismounted and offered his hand. "From here we walk." Sarah hesitated, glancing up at the rocky slope. "It's steep." He smiled. "Then it's a good thing I'm strong." Before she could protest, he bent and lifted her into his arms again. "Dom!" she gasped, laughing despite herself. "You can't carry me all the way up there." "Watch me," he said with a grin. And he did. Step by step, he carried her through the trees, the late afternoon light filtering through the pines. His breath came steady and sure, and every time she looked down at his face, focused, calm, unwavering, her heart beat a little faster. When they reached the ridge, the world opened before them. The valley stretched far and green below. The air was clean, alive. "There," Dom said, nodding toward a cabin nestled against the slope. "Steel Ridge, home." Sarah's eyes widened. The cabin was beautiful, hand-hewn logs, a chimney of stone, a garden already blooming. "You built all this?" she whispered. "With my own hands," he said, "for the woman I'd marry one day." "And that's me?" she asked softly. He looked down at her, still in his arms, still holding her as if she weighed nothing. "It's always been you?" For the first time, Sarah didn't doubt his strength or her worth. The laughter of that church felt like a distant dream now, fading into the wind that swept the ridge. What remained was the steady beat of his heart beneath her ear, and the quiet, powerful truth that she had finally been lifted, not just by his arms, but by love itself. By the time the sun sank behind the mountains, the last of Sarah's tears had dried. The climb to Steel Ridge had left her breathless. But when Dom Steele, pushed open the door to his cabin, she forgot to breathe altogether. Warm lamplight filled the single large room. The walls were made of polished cedar, the shelves lined with neatly stacked books and jars. A woven rug covered the floor, and a fire burned steadily in the stone hearth. Everything smelled faintly of pine, leather, and iron, a scent that was entirely him. Dom set her gently on her feet and stepped aside, watching her with quiet pride. "It's not fancy," he said, "but it's safe. No one comes up this far unless they're invited." Sarah turned slowly, taking in every detail. "You live here alone?" He nodded. "Until today." Something inside her softened. She ran her fingers along a carved wooden table, traced the iron tools hanging neatly on the wall. There was strength everywhere she looked, yet the space felt gentle. "Sit by the fire," he said, shrugging off his coat. "You must be hungry." Before she could protest, he moved to the kitchen corner, pulling down a pot and filling it from a kettle already warm from the coals. Within minutes, the smell of stew and herbs drifted through the cabin. "You cook?" she asked in surprise. He chuckled softly. "A man learns fast when no one else is around." Sarah smiled faintly. "I suppose so." When he brought her a bowl, her hands brushed his. His palms were calloused, scarred from years of work, yet his touch was careful, as if he was afraid she might break. "Eat," he said gently. She took a small bite. "It's good." He looked pleased, though he tried to hide it. "I'll take that as the highest praise." They ate in silence for a while, the crackle of the fire the only sound. When she set her bowl down, she caught him watching her, not the way Thomas or the townsman had, but as if he were memorizing the sight of her being content. "What are you thinking?" she asked softly. "That I was right," he said simply. "You belong here." Her breath hitched. "I've never belonged anywhere." He moved closer, his voice low. "You do now." The next morning, Sarah woke to the scent of wood smoke and fresh bread. She found Dom outside, splitting logs with clean, powerful swings. His back gleamed with sweat, his hair loose, his body moving with an ease that made her chest tighten. When he noticed her watching from the doorway, he grinned. "Morning, Mrs. Steele." She blushed. "It still sounds strange." "Then I'll keep saying it until it doesn't." Later that day, he showed her around the ridge, the small garden he'd planted, the forge where he shaped iron, the stream that ran behind the cabin. He taught her which herbs could heal wounds, how to light a fire even when the wood was damp, and how to listen to the mountain. "Listen to it?" she asked, smiling. He nodded seriously. "It talks, not in words, but in the wind, the way the trees lean, the way the air changes before rain." She tilted her head, trying to mimic him, and he laughed softly. "You'll learn. You've got patience. That's rarer than strength." That night, as rain pattered on the roof, Sarah sat near the hearth, sewing a tear in his shirt. Dom was by the door, mending a broken latch. The warmth of the fire, the steady rhythm of their work, it all felt so peaceful she almost forgot the chaos of her old life. "Dom," she said quietly, "why did you wait so long to tell me how you felt?" He didn't look up. "Because I didn't think I was the kind of man a woman like you deserved." She blinked. "A woman like me?" He turned then, his eyes soft and steady. "Kind, brave, real. I thought you deserved someone better than a man who lives among rock and metal." She set down her needle. "Dom, you carried me out of that church like I was light as a feather. No one ever made me feel that way before. You don't just have strength, you have heart." He swallowed, looking almost shy. "You make it sound like that's worth something." "It is," she said simply. For a long moment, the only sound was the rain. Then, quietly, she added, "And for what it's worth, you make me feel safe. You make me feel seen." Dom crossed the room in 2 strides and stopped before her. "Then I'll never stop seeing you," he said softly. He bent down and kissed her forehead, a small, reverent gesture, but it carried the weight of a vow. Outside, thunder rolled through the mountains, but inside, the world was still. For the first time, Sarah felt that she wasn't too much for anyone to carry. She was exactly enough for the man who had carried her heart from the start. The days on Steel Ridge fell into a quiet rhythm. Mornings began with the smell of firewood and bread. Evenings ended with laughter and the soft crackle of the hearth. Seraphina, Sarah Steele, found herself smiling again, something she hadn't done freely since childhood. But even peace has shadows. Sometimes, when she woke in the night, she'd find Dom Steele, sitting by the window, staring out toward the valley below. His jaw would be tight, his eyes haunted by something distant. One night, she finally asked, "You don't sleep much?" He didn't look away from the glass. "The mountain's quieter at night, easier to think." "About what?" He hesitated. Then, in a low, steady voice, "About the people I couldn't save." Sarah frowned. "What do you mean?" He leaned back in the chair, the firelight throwing shadows across his face. 3 years ago, I worked in the mine below this ridge. A collapse trapped 12 men. I got 7 of them out before the walls caved in again. His voice broke slightly. The others never made it. Sarah's breath caught. Dom, I've carried more than iron in these arms, he said quietly. I've carried bodies and guilt. She moved to his side, kneeling before him. That wasn't your fault. He gave a bitter laugh. You think the town believes that? They called me reckless, said I caused it by digging too deep. The Whitmores owned that mine, and when the dust settled, they needed someone to blame. Her eyes widened. Thomas's family. He nodded grimly. His father lost money and I lost my name. Since then, they've called me a murderer, a brute, a danger to decent people. That's why I stayed up here. Easier to be alone than to live as a ghost among men. Sarah felt tears sting her eyes. You saved lives. You risked yours. They twisted it into something ugly. Dom looked down at her. The world doesn't care about truth, Sarah. It only cares who speaks louder. She reached up, placing her hand against his chest. Then let them speak. You've already proved who you are. For a long moment, the silence between them felt heavier than the mountain itself. Then he took her hand in his, rough fingers trembling slightly. I don't deserve your kindness. She met his gaze. Then you'll just have to get used to it. But peace on Steel Ridge rarely lasted long. A week later, as they worked in the garden, the sound of hooves broke the morning calm. Sarah's heart lurched when she saw Thomas Whitmore dismounting at the gate, flanked by 2 armed men. Dom straightened slowly, his eyes cold as forged steel. You've come a long way, Whitmore, Thomas smirked. I heard you stole my bride. Thought I'd come see if the rumors were true. Sarah stepped forward. You humiliated me, Thomas. You had no right to call me your bride. Thomas ignored her, his eyes narrowing on Dom. You always thought you were better than me, a man who plays hero in the dirt while real men make money. But tell me, Steele, do you even know what she's worth? The Whitmores had a contract with her father. You took what belonged to us. Dom's voice rumbled low. She belongs to no one but herself. Thomas laughed harshly. You think that makes her safe? You live on land my family owns. You're squatting on Whitmore property. Dom took a slow step forward, towering over him. You're lying. Check the records, Thomas sneered. My father bought these hills years ago. You've been mining on Whitmore land all along. Sarah's blood ran cold. That can't be true. It's all true, Thomas said. And when I go to the sheriff, he'll make sure you're both gone. Dom's fists clenched, every muscle tensing. If you set one foot on this mountain again, Thomas grinned. You'll what? Carry me off like you carried her? Sarah stepped between them, her voice steady, though her heart raced. Leave, Thomas. You've done enough damage. He gave her a cruel smile. You'll regret this, Sarah. You and your mountain man both. As he rode away, Dom stood frozen, the weight of his past and the threat of his future crashing together like thunder. Sarah slipped her hand into his, grounding him. We'll face this, Dom. Together. He looked at her, eyes filled with equal parts love and fear. The last time I fought men like that, I lost everything. She squeezed his hand tighter. Then this time, you won't fight alone. Outside, the wind picked up across Steel Ridge, carrying the promise of another storm. But this time, they would stand side by side against it. 3 days later, the mountain went silent, the kind of silence that comes before something terrible. Even the wind had stopped moving. Dominic "Dom" Steele stood on the porch of the cabin, his rifle slung across his back, eyes fixed on the trail that wound up from the valley. Seraphina Sarah Steele stood beside him, one hand resting on her belly, the other clutching his arm. "You feel it, too," she whispered. He nodded. "They're coming." And then she heard it, the echo of hooves, the crack of wagon wheels, and the metallic glint of rifles in the sun. Thomas Whitmore had returned, but this time he didn't come alone. Behind him rode 6 armed men, and at the front of the group sat Sheriff Abel Carter, the lawman of Riverside. When they reached the clearing, Thomas smirked up at the porch. "Morning, Steele. I told you I'd be back." Dom's voice was calm, but it carried like thunder. "You're trespassing." The sheriff raised a hand. "Now, let's not make this harder than it has to be. Thomas here has deeds proving his family owns Steel Ridge. You've got no right to live up here." Sarah stepped forward before Dom could answer. "That's a lie. His father forged those papers. Everyone in Riverside knows it." Thomas sneered. "Careful, darling. You're still legally my fiancé." Dom's rifle was in his hands before anyone could blink. "Say that again." The sheriff raised his palms. "Put the gun down, Steele." "Not until he shuts his mouth." But Sarah moved between them, her voice breaking through the tension. "Dom, please, this is what he wants, to turn you into the monster they already think you are." Her words hung heavy in the air. Thomas grinned. "She's not wrong. Kill me, Steele, and you'll hang for it." Dom lowered the barrel slightly, but only slightly. "I don't need to kill you, Whitmore. I just need to outlast your lies." Then, turning toward the sheriff, he said evenly, "There's a chest buried beneath this cabin. You'll find my father's land deed there, signed before any Whitmore set foot on this ridge. My family owned this mountain long before theirs bought their name." The sheriff's brow furrowed. "If that's true, dig it up yourself," Dom said. Thomas's smirk faltered. "He's bluffing." Sarah crossed her arms. "Then prove it." The sheriff dismounted, motioned to his men, and within minutes the sound of shovels scraping dirt filled the clearing. Everyone waited. The air was thick enough to choke on. Then, thunk! The shovel hit wood. When they pried the chest open, the papers inside were old but intact, the seal of Edward Steele still visible beneath the dust. The sheriff straightened slowly, face pale. "It's legitimate." Thomas's face drained of color. "That's impossible." "Enough," the sheriff snapped. "You lied to the law, Whitmore. I suggest you leave before I forget I'm wearing this badge." Thomas's jaw twisted in rage, but when Dom took a step forward, he turned his horse and fled down the trail. The sheriff looked back once. "I reckon you've got more claim to this mountain than anyone. Sorry it took so long to see it." When they were gone, Dom exhaled for the first time in hours. Sarah reached for him, tears glistening in her eyes. "You were right," she whispered. "The truth just needed someone strong enough to stand for it." He cupped her face in his hands. "You gave me that strength." And as thunder rumbled far away, the storm that had chased them for so long finally broke and passed. They stood together on the ridge, still, unshaken, unbroken. The morning after the storm broke, Steel Ridge was bathed in gold. Mist clung to the pines. The air smelled of rain and iron, and for the first time in months, silence felt like peace instead of warning. Serafina, Sarah. Steele stood on the porch, watching the sunlight spill across the valley. Behind her, she heard the soft clink of tools. Dom Steele, fixing the fence that the sheriff's men had knocked down. He hummed quietly under his breath, a sound she had come to love, low, rough, content. "Careful," she said, smiling. "You've worked since sunrise." He wiped his brow with the back of his hand and gave her that familiar crooked grin. "Can't let the mountain fall apart. It's home now." She walked over, laying her hands over his. "No," she said softly. "We're home now." Dom looked at her for a long moment, and then his eyes drifted down to her growing belly. "You sure about this life, Sarah? It's quiet up here. Lonely sometimes?" She shook her head, smiling. "Not lonely. Not with you." He reached out, tucking a strand of her hair behind her ear. "I used to think strength meant standing alone. Now I know it means holding on to something worth protecting." "And I used to think love was about being chosen," she replied. "Now I know it's about being lifted." Dom chuckled, his hand tightening gently around hers. "Then I'll keep lifting you for as long as I have strength left." Sarah rested her head against his chest. The mountain breeze rustled the trees like a lullaby, the world below forgotten. Up here there was no laughter of mockery, no chains of shame, only two souls who had found each other against all odds. Steel Ridge had tested them, but love had built there forever. Sometimes love doesn't roar. It simply stands, steady as a mountain, refusing to let you fall. Sarah's story reminds us that strength isn't just in muscle or might, but in the courage to love yourself after being told you're unworthy. And the right person? They'll never make you feel heavy. They'll lift you with their hands, their heart, their faith in you. If this story touched you tonight, tell me, where in the world are you listening from? Because no matter the distance, we all carry the same hope, to find someone who lifts us and never lets go. Stay close. The next story is waiting.